Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast, where we explore health, wellness, performance, and try to improve not only your quantity of life, but your quality of life. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman. All right, everybody. Today, I'm really excited to have Travis Pelletier as a guest on the Winning Wellness Podcast. I was able to work with him on and off for a few years over at Lindenwood University. He has been more or less in the industry for about 16, 17 years, and has graduated from where I worked with him in a college setting. He's now specializing in the military sector. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about that and kind of broach a few more topics. Knowing him like I do, he's somebody that we could probably put together a 15-part podcast series. So I'm going to try to limit the questions and the subject matter today to try to get you guys like a good exposure to him and a good dose of his knowledge. But we're going to just kind of get into it a little bit here, Coach. Again, thanks for joining us. If you could just kind of start by telling us a little about your background. How did you get into the weight room, and kind of where did the weight room take you?
Yeah, so I think getting into the weight room as an athlete started as a middle schooler, just being in a weight training class, I think in between sports, or it being a placeholder if you weren't playing a winter sport. So that was my introduction, and I liked it. I don't want to say I loved it at that point. It just seemed like a fun new challenge. But then as I was more serious about sports in high school, our program was pretty progressive, I think, and just knowing that the structure and the validity of strength training would pay dividends on the field for performance. And I bought into that, and I guess it would have been my freshman year training with juniors and seniors, not keeping up by any means, but seeing them as role models was huge, and just wanting to improve myself to be better at my sports was where I was introduced to the weight room, and where I kind of fell in love with it and had my identity wrapped up into working hard and creating a work ethic from my dad and what he instilled in me, but also just knowing that I think it would pay off on the field if I invested in myself. So that's where it started. And then it wasn't until college where I realized there could even be a field of interest to not only study, but to actually have a career in. It was my second semester of my freshman year that I took an intro to like health and exercise science course, where it just gave you that idea or ideas of all the routes you could go with this degree. And it was in that semester that I realized what a strength and conditioning coach was. Like, we didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. One of our coaches in high school that coached the sport just happened to program, like probably a lot of people before probably 2005, 2003, when it wasn't that common to have a strength coach at the high school level. And so when I learned that, there was no doubt in my mind, like, this is what I want to do. And so I was pretty dialed in and focused on attending a CSCS throughout my time. That was at University of Oklahoma. And in the interim was personal training at recreational gyms, both on campus and off campus, just getting experience, having the NSCA certified personal training certification, and knowing that as eventually the organization I wanted to go through for my CSCS, I just thought it was natural to go with that one. And involved with state clinics, going and learning as much as I could on top of just the degree program, just set me up for then working with athletes when I finished my CSCS in my undergrad in 2006. From there, I was able to really get into formalized coaching and training athletes in a collegiate and or high level environment.
Awesome. And then as you're wrapping up maybe your undergrad and you're collecting, at what point did you get your CPT? It sounds like you got like the NSCA personal training cert. How?
Yeah, so that would have been, spring of 2003 would have been whenever I understood that I could be a strength conditioning coach. And then I believed, maybe it was not that spring, but that fall, just through talking with professors and graduate assistants in the degree program of, hey, you can't get your CSCS yet, but you can do, personal training as a way or a means to an ends. And so So it would have probably been that fall of 2003 or maybe the spring of 2004. I can't remember specifically when I was able to get that, and then to start training both at the recreation center on campus with just students, and then also off campus. I think initially it was at like a YMCA, so it was mostly with older folks on machine-based stuff that was fun and great to learn with, and to learn just how to engage, interact with a variety of different clientele, but not actually doing personal training where I was selling. It was more of like I think it's called like a fitness consultant, getting paid like an hourly wage to kind of just be there to help guide people and make sure they didn't get hurt.
Okay.
So
nice.
Yeah. So that would have been like in 2004, the CPT.
Nice. And then you get this, and then you graduate undergrad, you get the CSCS. Where did you do undergrad, and then how did you choose, and what did you do for grad school?
Yeah, so the undergrad was at the University of Oklahoma, and that finished up in 2006, spring of 2006. And I actually stayed on campus for a year working on an on-campus job that wasn't related to the strength and conditioning industry, but I still did training on the campus as well. So it was after that year, after I stayed in the University of Oklahoma working on a job in an outside field, that I realized I really want to delve into and become a strength coach. And so I was afforded the opportunity to interview and secure a position with the United States Olympic Training Center on Chula Vista, California, as an intern. And then so that was my first real experience working with high-level athletes. And so that was the fall of 2007, which led into the following year, me going to grad school at the University of Tulsa. First, taking the position as a strength coach, and then second, trying to figure out, okay, what degree program will I pursue? And having an undergrad at that point in exercise science, I just was like, okay, cool, I'll just do a master's in exercise science. Well, I didn't know until after I accepted the job that they don't have a master's degree there, even though they're a research university, which is kind of odd. I don't think that's very typical. So I was like, all right, well, I have a decision to make, and I ultimately chose the Master's of Business Administration, just because I thought it'd be the most. It definitely was going to be the most challenging, because I hadn't had business classes before that, but I thought it'd be the most, I guess, diverse and beneficial if for some reason I didn't want to coach it at a point in the future. Yeah.
Do you have so I think that you are one of the, you're a lifelong learner. So I'll talk to you and you'll jump on different subject matter for a while and kind of like dive in deep. What do you think? Do you have a comment on maybe those who are in exercise science undergrads and choose to do a master's degree in the same subject matter, or do you have a philosophy on maybe diversifying your education?
I think there's benefits to both, because you can go deep and you can go very specific and just get a even more beyond the foundational knowledge of exercise science or anything within that field, to kind of set yourself apart and maybe become more of an expert than a generalist. So I think there's benefits to that. And then I also think there's benefits to broadening your horizons. I know you have at least 3 degrees by this point outside of your undergrad. And so I think there's benefits, because you can see, and I think you can make connections with these other fields of study and how it can relate back, and even help you more so to help your athletes and your philosophy of coaching, being exposed to these other areas of interest and areas of study that if you just stayed pretty single-minded, you might not have that opportunity. But I also believe that with the internet and with the education through things like YouTube and master classes, things we didn't have access to back in the mid 2000s like I did, and even arguably like the early 2010s, that you can basically learn almost anything that you want without having to formally go and get a degree in it. And I think there's even been people who've talked about, and Tim Ferriss might be one of them, where he kind of selected different things he wanted to create his own MBA. It's like a self-starter MBA or a self-driven MBA, whether it's through books or master classes or a combination of both, or taking courses where you're not officially enrolled to get credit. I forget what that term is. Ad hoc. I don't know if that's the correct term.
That sounds right.
Something like that. And so I think now is even more. It's more prevalent. I think it's easier to do something like that if you're trying to find or trying to diversify your knowledge and your expertise by looking outside of your field of interest. There's a book, I can't remember the title. You might be able to find it later, but it's called More Than You Know. And that book is primarily about investing just in the financial industry. But what I like about that book and the subtitle is something to the effect of like learning things outside of the financial industry to help you understand and or make better decisions about your investment strategy. And so it takes fields from things that aren't even related or closely related to investment strategy and helps to define and helps you color your understanding and help you to kind of create different frameworks that you wouldn't otherwise have if you weren't trying to be open-minded about how this can relate. So I think that's a really fun book that just kind of, I guess, encapsulates how you can go about, teaching yourself and learning things that are outside of your specific job, your title, your role, and or your previous educational background, without having to necessarily go get another master's degree or a PhD.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Yeah, say as someone with the handful of degrees, you can that information is sitting out there. If you can just find a good resource, you can run with it. So it's a funny world we live in now.
I think even it's almost overwhelming. I think there's another book way back in the day called The Paradox of Choice that I really like the title of it, but that was maybe in the middle to late 2000s of just talking about all the different choices that we have, even just as simple as going to the supermarket and picking out what type of peanut butter you want, and just how it can become daunting just to choose. Like, I don't know which one to choose. And I think the same thing now, like you have so much information and so many platforms and so many things you could chase after that it's almost hard to kind of focus in and be like, hey, what is important to me and what do I really want to like focus on, especially with how distractible we've become with just attention spans and social media and just things that aren't really designed or haven't been designed for you to go and do like the deep work like Cal Newport talks about in his book.
Yeah. Big Cal Newport fan. Definitely push that agenda as much as I can, especially my the main group that I work with is college age students, and they are digital natives, where they value their online time almost as much as the real world, and
Right.
that Cal Newport stuff is nobody's talking about that to them. So it's probably one of the more valuable things I can share with them.
Yeah, I think something that plays to that you might have experienced, but I know I have, is that when I was an undergrad, which was from 2002 to 2006, my best studying took place on whatever level, usually not the first level of this old historic library at the University of Oklahoma, in some random room where I shut myself in there. There was no music, there was no podcast, there was no kind of way, I guess, to distract yourself, because by that time I don't think there wasn't smartphones. There were cell phones, but it would literally be hours of me studying, like focused attention, getting up to take breaks when I needed to, whatever, for bathroom and just kind of getting some fresh air. But when I was in college, or when I was in grad school, not even 4 years later, by that point there were smartphones. By that point there were things like YouTube and podcasts to a certain extent, but like Pandora and music apps. And I found myself, even just that short amount of time, unable to focus for very long, and I almost needed something. Like the silence was deafening. Like I couldn't focus within the silence, where that was like my best way to do that beforehand. And I saw then how things can change, I think, chemically in your brain, of just this necessity of I guess, input or just stimulus.
Yeah.
When you're trying to focus, which is kind of wild. And now we're 13 years past that. It's probably just gotten worse. I know it has for me, and I know just in general it has, especially for, you called it the internet natives. Like that's all they've known. A lot of 18, 20-year-olds, that's all they've known for most of their lives. I think Facebook was created in 2003, 2004. So we're coming across the first generation of individuals who have never not known a world without Facebook, not just the internet.
And I'll add in one more comment on that. That deep work is one thing I think is interesting or kind of like enlightening is that you going into the old room and locking yourself in there in that library or building or whatever, that was a habit, but deep work is not a habit. Your ability to get rid of stimulus and input and to stay focused is a skill set. And so the one thing Cal Newport talks about, he says like your habit sets you up to build the skill set. Is that you have to distance yourself, and then once you're distanced, to allow yourself to stay on topic is a skill. So I think that's something that I'll play around with it, and then I'll get away from it, and when I go back to it, I'm like, what happened? I was good at this like 2 months ago. But yeah, it's kind of funny how quick you lose that ability to just dial in.
I think it's what you're speaking to is creating white space, and physical white space in terms of just not being distracted, but also mental white space so you can focus. And if you don't even take the time or attempt to understand your mind and how you can do that, create this white space and make that a habit, as you say, then yeah, I like how you delineate that the skill will never come.
Can we fall back to grad school at Tulsa, and
Sure.
your strength and conditioning coach? Can you kind of run us through a timeline from there to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So Tulsa was the first time where I was actually responsible for teams and team programming, not so much team scheduling, but more of just being an actual strength coach for teams. So having the keys to the car, if you will. So that was a very productive time and a very challenging time because of the schedule of being in the weight room by 5 a.m. and staying until 6 p.m. and then having college classes till 9 p.m. and then trying to figure out how to study and sleep and do all the things you're supposed to do to be well, as your podcast is about. It was good and it was productive, but it was also very challenging. I think I would have enjoyed either one of those experiences by themselves much more, being a strength coach only and or pursuing the MBA. Doing it together was almost a lethal combination, but I was able to survive. From that time, though, the head coach, my head strength coach, as most guys do, follow their head coaches that hire them, and so he was hired by the head coach who left for a job at the University of Pittsburgh. So that was my next stop. Thankfully, he invited me to come be one of his assistants up there. So I was there for about a year, just right at a year. Things changed. The head coach had other plans and left. So my strength coach, my boss, left as well. I was not on those plans. Not because I didn't have the choice to go with them, but I wasn't. I didn't feel comfortable with leaving and being a part of a program that I was bought in and sold out with the athletes as well as university and the city for the 5-year plan as much as anybody. And for that to change, I was pretty immature at that point to really know the business side of sports and how all that worked. I guess maybe not immature, but more naive would be a better way to put it. And so I just told myself, if this is how this will go, or this is how I have to be, and not knowing where I'm going to be from year to year, even though I want to be honor the words of the people I work for, and I want to honor the integrity of being someone who wants to stay. Then I was like, I probably need to get out of college athletics. So that's when I had the opportunity to then interview and actually secure the first job in tactical, which was in Maryland with a unit near Fort Meade. And that was over 2 years of a great experience, because that experience with tactical, one, helped me understand there's a whole area outside of sports where people are having to perform, people are having to have plans to help them prevent injury, to increase their longevity, to help with their performance as it relates to their job. And that's where you can get the tactical athlete paradigm. Before even 2000, that was 2011. I guess that was 2012. That was still relatively new within the strength and conditioning world. I think only maybe 3 to 4 years before that did it become a thing where you had strength coaches, I guess you could say, embedded, or at least starting to become popular in the tactical setting. So that was really key and instrumental, not just because it was a different way for me to try and apply my knowledge as well as my background within strength and conditioning, but also the athletes that I worked there were not nearly as kinesthetically aware. I want to say less talented. Just a lot of the soldiers, whenever they get into the military, they got to do more aerobic and like endurance-based events, like a 2-minute sit-up, 2-minute push-up, 2-mile run. The requirements for training like an athlete were not really there, and so I think part of the reason why we became something that the tactical world wanted was because of where we were operating with the war and in the environments that they're operating in. Just knowing that our special forces guys need more than just sit-ups, push-ups, and 2-mile runs to get them prepared for these austere environments with 80-pound rucks through the mountains of Kandahar or wherever. And so that really helped me become a better coach in that unit, because my athletes weren't as talented, they weren't as gifted, they weren't as savvy. I mean, there'd be times, and this in college, where you would show an athlete, or you'd be teaching an athlete certain movements, and they do it the first couple times, and they make it look like it was easier. They make you almost look like a joke, and you've been practicing and refining this movement for years. It's like, what in the world? But just that's how people are made differently. So didn't see as much of that in the tactical world, to say the least. Nothing against those athletes, because their work ethic and their drive and their ability to want to improve was there. From there, I was when I first met you in 2000. I guess it would have been 2014, summer of 2014, where it was my first stint at Lindenwood for about a year. I was there as the football strength coach, and I think at that time I was also a dual role with the fitness center and overseeing a bunch of student workers on top of teaching classes. So it was your stereotypical small school. It was a stereotypical small school, kind of do it everything, but the difference with Lindenwood is just the amount of GAs and the amount of assistants and the amount of support for all these sports that they had was actually pretty impressive. It was a very robust athletic department in terms of strength and conditioning and the sports performance, and especially at that point, it was a D2 school, so that was impressive. I wasn't there very long. Just conflict of philosophy with some of the coaching staffs that I was working for, and so I was able to then move on to James Madison University as an assistant again, working with a director of football, and then having my own sports. So it's kind of nice to step back out of being kind of the main guy and having to take the lead, and just get back to like why I was in coaching to begin with, which was to be on the floor and to influence athletes and their abilities and their injuries, coming back from those injuries. And then I got a call from the new coach that came in for the new football coach that came in for Lindenwood in 2017, and it seemed like it would be a better fit than the previous staff that I was working there with, and it was an opportunity to kind of step back up and take another head guy role. And I feel like I was more prepared for that then than I was previously, and so that was a 2-year stint back at Lindenwood. That was, I think I've even said this since I've left there, that if there's anybody that I'd work for in the industry for football, it'd be Judd Stugart. He's one of the guys I respect, and I think is very true to his word in terms of his integrity of where his audio and his video match. I think a lot of times you'll hear and you'll see things from it could be professional sports coaches or collegiate sports coaches, or even just in the business environment where people say one thing, but their video or how they play it out doesn't really match. And he was a guy that was true to that. And I really respected him for that. And I really respected his ability to give his coaches autonomy. And he wasn't one of those coaches where you had to be there 24/7 because that was just the MO of how college sports operates. That you do what you need to do, you get things done, and you need to go take care of your family. So I really appreciated that. And I let him know when I interviewed that if there's anything that would take me away from, if you were to hire me, college athletics or sport, it would be an opportunity to get back into tactical. And it'd have to be the right opportunity. And that happened to come up in the spring of 2019 with this job. And this is where I've been ever since. And I think he understood that. He realized that. And I think he appreciated that I was honest with him initially, but I think he could understand why I would want to come back to tactical for several reasons. We can get into that later too. I think that's another question for you that you have. So that's kind of the journey to here, just in and out of college and tactical for the last, I guess it would be almost 11 years. So I think right now I'm pretty close to being half and half tactical and college with I guess it would be now almost 16 years of experience. It's almost coming up on 8 and 8. So that's cool. Something I figured out this year. I think it's speaking about where my experience is. So that's kind of the journey from undergrad or my first coaching gig to here.
Yeah, I think, and thank you for sharing that. I think that was, and we're going to go more military in our conversation in just a second here, but that's one of the big reasons I wanted to kind of capture a conversation with you is I interact with a lot of young future coaches over at Linwood, and to have a resource for them to understand how you might get into it and some of the things that it entails, I think will be extremely valuable. And just because, like you were saying, it wasn't really a thing when you were getting started, and I'm a few years behind you, and same thing for me is I wasn't hearing about it. I got to go on base I was over interning at the USOC in Colorado Springs, and I got to go on base to the Fort Carson in 2011. But that was like, they did have a weight room and they did have some strength coaches in it, but it was really like bootstrapping and just getting started. Yeah. So
very primitive. Yeah.
So thank you for that. And then can we kind of go can we go a little bit further into maybe the military discussion?
Sure.
What do you like about it? You're working more with special forces now. If you could talk about that, and maybe just talk about like the good, the bad, and the frustrating, I guess we'll kind of label it like that.
Yeah, I think like you said, we could have a multi-part podcast on a lot of these topics, so we'll keep it somewhat brief. But I think with the good, with any position that you find yourself in, whether it's in, I think, coaching or within the business world or academics, wherever, one of our coaches talked about the framework of thinking about the 4 things that's going to either entice you or keep you in a position that are the most significant to, are you happy, or do you feel like you're in a place where you're going to thrive? And he talked about people, position, or people, pay, purpose, and progress. And so as it relates to the people, at least here in the tactical setting, this is a fun group to work with, especially the operators, special forces guys. So, and just the difference between an operator and a soldier. An operator, whether it's in the Army or the Navy, the Marines. I'm in the Army within special operations within the Army. So the special forces personnel for the Army is your Green Berets and your Ranger Regiment, or your Army Rangers. And with those two populations, you go through an assessment and a selection that requires, mental and physical fortitude of kind of proving yourself through different selections as well as courses that you have to pass and you have to get through, that not everyone gets through, I should say. So it's very hard, it's very selective. And so you basically go from a big Army unit generally to then say, okay, I want to go be a special forces operator. So then you go to assessment and selection to become an operator, and then you get to a group like this, a 7th group. The group you're talking about that when you're in Fort Carson is called 10th groups. There's different groups throughout, and you can have the same process as people have seen or might know about, like in the Navy with buds. If you're in the Navy or if you're a Marine and you want to go become a Navy SEAL, you got to go through their buds selection. And then from there, they also have a course that you have to go through, and you have to pass in order to get onto a SEAL team. So with that being said, the people here are very driven. They're highly motivated for the most part. I think there's a bell curve, just like with athletes. Even with athletes that are on scholarship, there's a bell curve of people are more driven than others. I think one of the things I didn't realize until someone here that's on a team, a special operations team, told me was when I would get frustrated with some individuals that are special forces qualified, is like, I don't get it. Like, why are they not showing up, or why are they not, doing the program? And I forget who it was, but he was like, you got to know that there's some guys who absolutely crushed selection and the qualification course and are like the studs, and probably can do their own training and do the stuff because that's just how they are. Or maybe they're just built different, like the collegiate athletes, where they can just do some phenomenal things and they're just built that way. There's a majority of people who could use help, who doesn't necessarily need help, but could probably be guided one way or the other with your programming, could probably benefit. And who are also somewhat motivated for the most part and are driven. And then you have like the tail end where they barely got in. Like if there's only 100 people out of 500 they got through selection, there's what is the Mr. Insignificant from the NFL draft. There is the last guy that just got in. And that's not saying that his character or that his physical attributes are to such an extent that like he shouldn't have got in, but there's this continuum or this, I guess, bell curve of people. And so when you get to the point where they get here, sometimes people rest on their laurels of, yeah, I've already been selected. I've already gone through this. I don't need to continue to be physically fit. I don't need to be continually improving who I am and what I'm doing. Yeah, so I think there can be complacency, even in special operations, unfortunately, for guys who are just getting here or guys who have been here for a while. It could be for a host of reasons, not because they just don't care anymore. It could be a lot more things going on besides that. But all that to say, I was talking about the people and how this is a fun group to work with. But for the most part, those who are serious about their training and who take serious their physical and mental training, as well as capabilities of how they need to be the best, they're fun because of their ability to push themselves. And their ability to push themselves physically, I think, comes from their mentality of how they've been assessed and selected. Like, to be able to endure and to push themselves beyond what most people can and what most people would want to, which is part of the reason why they're assessed and selected, is because of that ability to kind of push past these limits that you don't think you can achieve. This can be a hindrance, so we can talk about that as well, where it can kind of be a double-edged sword. If they push so hard and they push so much they keep this selection and assessment mentality for almost too long, to where now it becomes a detriment and they get injured. And I think I've talked to you about this before, but my best analogy about this, when you're comparing the tactical special operator athlete to a collegiate athlete, and once again, this is a generality, so this isn't always true, is that in this population specifically, it's a lot of times I'm saying, whoa, and I'm pulling back the reins. Like, the horses are trying to get out of the gate into the pasture, jump the fence of the pasture, and just go through and just be running wild like Mustangs. And I got to like hold on to the reins, be like, whoa, like, we can do that. We don't have to, but we can. And so it's really trying to rein them in and be like, hey, we can. Yeah. So with the whoa mentality, it's the quote that I always give these guys is, the difference between knowledge and wisdom is, knowledge is knowing you can do something. Wisdom is knowing you don't have to. Like, you don't have to train like you're getting assessed and selected every workout or every week. You don't have to be in this fight or flight mentality to survive. Not saying you need to rest on your laurels and you need to be complacent, but our training can be much more productive than you wiping yourself off the floor with your workouts every time you come to the weight room or every time you go to the track. Now, on the flip side, with the college athletes, as you know, a lot of times it can be frustrating there, because I'm not even as a preface, like I wasn't even in college with NIL or with all these other things that now are provided. It's different context from when I was back there, even just in 2019. But whether gals are on scholarship or not, and I feel like there was a lot of times where I'm trying to like kick them in the back of the butt, like, let's go. Like, why are you not showing up on time? Why are you not motivated to be here at 6 a.m.? You are on scholarship. You are getting your classes paid for. You are even getting stipends for living expenses, all these things. And so I feel like the dichotomy here is like I'm saying, whoa, whereas in college, it was a lot of times, if not motivating, at least helping the athletes to see why they're doing what they're doing, and hopefully that being a motivation in and of themselves. Because there's a quote by Bob Stoops about how you're not going to get an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old motivated to do anything that they don't want to do themselves. So you got to show them the value of why it's good if they don't already know, and why it's valuable before them to kind of buy in or maybe turn the corner or flip that switch. Now there's athletes who already know that, which are great to work with. Here, I think a lot of these guys have understood that, have gone through that, but we got to rein them in a lot of times just so that they don't continue to get frustrated with their lack of progress in their training, and or so they can see progress because they're not getting injured all the time, because they're still trying to train in the way that they were training to get assessed and selected. They're still trying to train how they were in their 20s, where now they're in their 30s, and they're 7 years on the job. They're 2 deployments, combat deployments into their career. They've got however many kids. They might have had a divorce by now, who knows? So they have all this extra stuff that comes along with just life, because these are a lot older individuals than our college athletes. And so the coaches that I think are successful in this environment they understand that better, and they don't get so frustrated when a team here or an athlete just doesn't show up. Whereas before in college, like, you'd be sending athletes to go get his buddy in the dorm because he played Halo all night the night before, right? Stuff like that we used to do, and I used to do, where now there's just a little more nuance. It doesn't give those guys excuses not to show up or communicate, but what I like about this population too is that they're in similar stages of life as we, the coaches, are in many respects, in terms of having families, having jobs, having responsibilities. And just like in college, as it is here, but I think even more so here, like, this 1 hour of their day is not the most important part of their day. To us, it's very important because it's our jobs, but to them, it's a part of their jobs and a part of who they are and what they need to be responsible for. But they have so many other things that they're juggling as well. You have to appreciate that. I think pay, that's the second P, or one of the P's within that paradigm or that framework. Pay would be, I would say, better than most in terms of strength conditioning jobs. If you're looking at strength conditioning, most, I say, outside of like Power 5 conference football, basketball, if you're not the head guy or like the first assistant. And with that, I think also comes the hours. You're contracted in most of these positions to just 40 hours a week and a certain amount per year. And so you're kind of limited by working too much or overworking. It doesn't mean that we don't go over, but it's nothing like the hours that are sometimes expected as a strength conditioning professional or as an athletic trainer or anyone in the college sector, in terms of your hourly expectation, which you don't want to calculate what you're making per hour in those environments usually. The other thing about, I guess, kind of the pay, or just the setup here with the position, is just your flexibility within the hours, and that varies from unit to unit. But our flexibility in working a 6-hour day versus a 10-hour day versus a 12-hour day versus doing 4 10s is very flexible. You have weekends off. You don't travel. It's as long as you get your hours in the specified time. And for us here, at least, it's like an 80-hour two work weeks. So 40-hour over a 2-week time period, you need to get 80 hours in. How that looks doesn't matter. Nice. I think the one of the last things is purpose. And with the purpose, you can't compare the purpose of training these men and women for what they're trying to do. And here, as operators, it's lethality. Like, we are training them to be lethal. We are training them to protect. We are training them to do things that most other individuals are not willing to do, can't do, won't do, but unfortunately can be necessary in protecting freedoms and protecting the freedoms of others. So when we hire people, we had to, I think, address that over the last 2 years, and just making sure people understood, like, you are going to be an athletic trainer here in this environment. You are going to be a strength coach. But at the end of the day, you are here for one reason, and that's to help operators stay lethal, to help their performance to be able to do that, and to keep them in the fight as long as they want in terms of longevity of staying on the team to be able to do that, because that's ultimately their goal. At least it's a lot of their goals and why they got assessed and selected in the first place. With progress, I think that can be the part of the frustrating part. That's the last P. The progress just means like your ability to move up, like upward mobility within this profession. There are so few jobs that have like a management or a director feel to it, like you would in college, like a director of Olympic sports or director of football, or even just like an athletic director, which is more of like looking over the department. There's very few jobs that are like that in the tactical setting. They have opened up more recently, and we can talk about that with the big Army adopting this same model that Special Operations has had now for 10, 12 years. Big Army has now opened up that type of model to just the general soldier population. Our boy Matt Matau is doing that over at Fort Bragg. So some of those positions require or have like director roles that people in my positions have transitioned into, but the director roles that are within Special Operations or within the enterprises that we fall under are so far and few between and so competitive, as you can imagine, since there's such a lack of progress, that that's just one thing that people need to keep in mind, is that like I've been in this position now for almost 5 years. And for, I think some, if you're in the collegiate side and you are still doing strength conditioning and that's all you're doing and you weren't teaching, you weren't doing all these other things, it might look like you're not trying to improve yourself as a professional or trying to, I guess, climb this ladder. Whereas here, I don't think it's because of a lack of want or someone's desire to move up. It's just the opportunities are so few. And part of that, unfortunately, is some of the positions are government positions. So it's a civilian position that the government pays for that's not a government contractor position. What that means is like you are getting paid by the government. You are not getting paid by the contractor that the government hired to perform a service. What that means is those government positions sometimes have stipulations on who can actually apply to them. So from the very beginning of like a position, it could be a director role, say like the director role here, my director here, or my coordinator here is Mike Sanders. He's been in this since the beginning, like 2011. Sometimes the positions like his actually state like you have to be a veteran, you have to have a disability, you have to have worked for the civil service, you have to have had certain things, like not more of a criteria versus a like an ability or like a master's degree. So it's more about like a criteria of the type of applicant you are versus like your I guess your credentials, if you will. And so by default, a lot of these positions I can't even apply for, but yet they're positions that would be beneficial for guys like myself and guys that are not within the military system to be able to bring in different perspectives from the outside, which is why we're hired as contractors. We are hired as a contractor because the government hasn't fulfilled that role within the government system, like a GS or a civilian position, like my boss, or in the tactical or in the military setting, they don't have an Army job that you can be and you sign up or you enlist. It's an Army strength coach. They don't have that, so they contract out positions of expertise to government contractors to fulfill those positions. So I think it would be very beneficial to have people who have been in those type of positions to fill some of these government roles, because they haven't grown up in this bureaucracy and the system of kind of seeing things a specific way. We have more nuance and context both within the tactical setting as well as our experiences outside, in college, in professional, in the private sector, which is the reason why we were hired in the first place. So that just kind of goes to the frustrating part of one of the frustrating parts of just how it relates to the people, pay, purpose, and progress, and that the progress can be is limited, and so people could get frustrated by that, I think. You talked about, I think, the good, the bad, and the ugly, or frustrating, I guess you could say. The bad part, I guess, would be, I guess that's kind of progress. That's frustrating and it's bad, like it's progress. And I think the second thing that I guess you could say is bad, outside of just being frustrating, is just trying to create change. Trying to create change in a system that has seen an issue or a problem or tried to solve a problem one way for so long. So as it relates to physical capabilities, like it being very endurance based up until we've had the new Army combat fitness test rollout that has been now debated, but at least implemented the last couple of years. It's just a new physical test that is a better, I guess, overall assessment of someone's capabilities versus before just being sit up, push up, 2 mile. So creating change and influencing up takes a long time. And there's a quote I actually used to one of my colleagues for this exact type of thing. And the quote is by Upton Sinclair, and it says, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." I feel like that probably was not easy to hear, although he agreed with me. And it won't be easy for people to hear that are kind of, I guess, at higher levels that are resisting change. But I feel like that can be something that's bad. So if you're really trying to like be gung-ho and spark change and create change and you want it fast, that kind of comes down to the frustrating part. The bureaucracy of the government won't necessarily allow it. And unfortunately, individuals that are in leadership positions sometimes don't want to understand it because they want to believe how they think and how they think things should go is the best way, despite them hiring and hopefully listening to the people that they've hired to give them hopefully a better understanding of how things operate 1, 2, 3 levels down. The other part of frustration is similar in the same regard of like being hired by the government for being an expert, but then not getting recognized as that expert or not getting appreciated as that expert. Another coach that I used to coach with in college, who has also now been in tactical for a while, has a quote. It said, "You're only a subject matter expert if the Army agrees you are." You could put in any entity that's governmental entity instead of Army in that place. And that comes down to like individuals I work with. So just soldiers that walk through the door, they're like, "Who's this guy?" Like, "Oh, he's a strength coach. What does he know about strength? He doesn't look like he can move anything," or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And you like teams, like so somebody, the leadership of a team and them growing up on a team. So them being a leader on the team now, so it means they've been in the military sometimes 8, 10, 12 years, and them having experience of not having a coach, not needing a coach. Why do we need them? Like I didn't have that back in 2012 when I was operational and hitting it hot and heavy with my deployments. So it's almost an insult to people's lived experience of, well, why is that even necessary? I didn't have it. Why do we need it now? So it can even be with teams and leaders, and then just leadership in general, whether it's higher entities or not. So I think that can be frustrating. Is that I think I have here on my notes, like you have to show you care just about the individual, about the team, about the organization. You have to be able to show that and be genuine about that, not to try and get to them and now make change and influence, but you have to show that you care before you get results or even have a shot at them even listening to like your expertise. Whereas I think in college, when you're hired as a coach, usually depending on your background and how young you are, where your experience has led you to, the athletes have a kind of certain imbued respect for you because you're older, you've got a degree, you are a leader in their eyes. Generally, the head coach and you, or the head coach and the strength coach can have a good relationship, or can at least have a respectable relationship where there's a degree of respect between the two, that you have your athlete's best interest in mind, and that hopefully the head coach trusts your ability to lead. But I think you see it on the college side too. I mean, you have the coach who wants to do the same conditioning test that they did back 20 years ago because it was hard and it was gruesome, or they think that you need to have certain numbers in the weight room to be efficacious as an athlete on the field. So I think you get that same type of subject matter expert criteria applied even as a strength coach. But
yeah, it's like I always say, like, I will lump personal training and strength and conditioning into this, is that it's like the best worst job, because it's the best job when you're working with people and it's going good, you're like building relationships and impacting their life. But it's the worst job when everyone is an expert. At the college level, they're all experts because, especially young men, because over the last few years, those young men have grown like 6 to 10 inches in height and gained like 50 pounds of muscle. Does it have anything? Does it have anything to do with them alternating bench press and bicep curls? Probably not. But like you're saying, you don't want to argue results, or argue outcomes, and like if I'm 18 years old and I just have turned from a little boy into a man over the last few years with my my McDonald's diet and my bench press routine, I'm gonna feel like an expert. And that can be, I think for you, one thing you were talking about a little bit earlier, but I think for you, one of the reasons that I recall, like, I have like fond memories of working with you, is that you're like an enthusiastic educator. Like you will bring in like high energy, not necessarily like clapping your hands and screaming at the top of your lungs. And you will bring
not necessarily the hype man. Yeah.
And you'll bring in like logic as well. And I think for you, I think for me, watching you deliver like that sweet spot in between to young athletes, particularly we were with football together, so young men. So watching you like, hey guys, here's what we got to do, and here's why it's important to do that. So I think of what I would consider several of your strengths, I think that being like a practical educator is pretty high on the list.
I think that's true for me too. I think that's I hadn't thought of it like that, but you got to be very much, and that might be why I think I do well here too, is because you have to. I think I got that from the military as well, from my time initially from 2012 to 2014, is because I had to be like that. And if I didn't educate, and if I didn't like almost, not to say over-educate, but really help people see not just that I am the expert, but that okay, I am the expert, but here's how it applies to you, and here's why it's important, and here's how I can help that. I think that's part of the reason why coming back to tactical is a little bit easier, but also why I think I do well here is because I think the guys here respond to that very well, the practical education part, because these guys by default are learners and are put in environments where they have to learn fast, to assimilate very well in environments that they don't speak their native. A lot of guys don't speak the native language in some of these places they operate. They culturally are in a different spot, but they got to be able to take what they know and take their skills and expertise and be able to operate in those environments and be successful. It's usually working with that population too. So they very much are learners and want to have that knowledge.
And they're also like I'll see it at the level I'm at. Statistically, the younger ones are getting like their IQs are going up, not because their brains are actually like changing, it's because information is so much more available. Like younger people just know way more, for better or worse, than they used to. And so like at the college level, again, we've talked about this. I'm not the most social media present person on the planet. They will come in and they'll say, "Hey, I've been seeing Sally Smith. She's got this account and she does the X, Y, and Z, and she says it's because of LMNOP." And I'm like, I'm gonna check that out. And you know what? Sometimes, a phase or two later, Sally Smith's stuff is on my program because I took the time to play around with it and to learn a little bit. And these athletes are not they're not dumb.
No.
A lot of them are bringing really good information like to my feet and influencing me. So I imagine that those guys and gals that you might be encountering who have been in for a decade plus, I'm sure that they have opinions and a little bit of logic too.
Oh, no doubt. I think they have, experience as well with strength and conditioning, both with other coaches as well as with, programming that they've bought or that they've seen or that they've researched. And yeah, I think that's interesting, especially the athletes and how they're getting information and how you can be humble enough to not take offense to it. The Instagram influencer telling them these new things, where some of it has probably some validity, but I think the ability to be open and willing to at least meet them where they are and not just kind of discount them can be beneficial just for the relationship itself.
Yeah. And who better to tell us like what their bodies need than them? Like they know how they feel. They know what they're excited to do. If they're excited to do like, I don't know, like a freaking one-handed med ball shot put throw that day, like we're probably going to get more out of it than something else we had programmed. Which is not a movement I disagree with, by the way. It's like just a random example, but yeah, if they're gonna do an okay movement enthusiastically, they'll probably get way more out of it than like the perfect movement done with sub-maximal effort. So
yeah, I think that goes back to a conference. It was an interesting conference that I went to when I was at James Madison. The tennis coach wanted me to go to I forget what the actual acronym for the conference was, but it was basically like an international tennis strength and conditioning conference. And I think other coaches beforehand had been reluctant to go. Like it's just going to be a bunch of people who think they know tennis experts that think they know something about strength and conditioning, like balancing on Bozu balls, throwing like little nub balls back and forth to try and work on something. I went there and I was surprised. We can try and look up what that was later, but I was surprised at just the level of scholarship, the level of research, and just some of the basics that I was like, I really I appreciated where they went with this conference. And one of the keynote speakers there was Andre Agassi's coach back in his heyday. And Agassi, and this is before social media, any of that, Agassi would just come in one day and the coach would be like, here's the plan. He's like, why are we doing that? He's like, well, it's X, Y, Z. He's like, but why? He's like, well, and eventually he's like, well, I don't know why. He's like, well, I experimented with bench pressing like on back-to-back days and I felt great. He's like, all right, well, let's try it. And like he basically would listen to Agassi, and Agassi, like you said, knew himself and kind of his body better than anyone. Sometimes athletes don't know and they just have preferences, but the quote that stuck with me is that the coach, I forget what the guy's name, but is like, whose training is it? Make the athlete's training theirs. It's not yours. Your perfect pretty little program, like you just talked about, great. But if they're not bought in, or if they don't understand whether they want to or not, like it's only going to go so far. So I think even at Lindenwood, I think we might have even programmed this some where you helped me with some of the parameters of guys that need certain things at the end of lifts. Like I think we had a hypertrophy program that you put together for me, and we had like a strength based, then a power based, and it's like, and sometimes these guys are going to do arm farm, and that's all right. Like I used to be a guy that was totally against anything that was biceps and triceps. Like, well, they're going to go to the recreation center and bench press their heart out for 2 hours, and they're going to do arm farm, even despite working out earlier that day, because they think they need it and they want it. It's like, well, give them a taste of it now, let them have some of that, have fun, and be engaged with it, and they'll be even more bought in to go and do some of the harder things that they're not excited about. That's sexy, like getting on a 500-pound squat bar, or cleaning 300 pounds, and it not be technically perfect, whatever.
Yeah, I think just that, and just enjoying the process too. Like that's such a big part, because like they have options. Like they could go to a different school, they could come into the session and be like hang back and like not try and things like that. But you just give them a little bit of that autonomy, a little bit of that control, and then it's their session, and then they show up a couple minutes earlier and they come in with ideas for what they want to do, and they tell their teammate to like let's hit that extra set at the end and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's all that good stuff. Can you? Can we cycle?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, can we cycle back? You were talking about, hiring, talking about to the ATs that you might be working with. Can you talk about the high performance model that you guys have going on?
Sure. So within our setup and with most setups within special operations, and even now, as I was talking about with the big army, their program is called H2F. They've kind of modeled what they've seen from special operations. They've modeled what they're doing off of what we've been doing the last 10 years and bringing it to the masses. But essentially, we, at least here within the physical paradigm of a high performance model, we have physical therapists, athletic trainers, dietitian, strength coaches, and here particularly we have a coach that's a hybrid. We call him a bridge, where he's an ATC and he's a CSCS, and he is the bridge between someone getting injured or being post-op and then strength and conditioning, that sometimes they might need to go to him specifically for his injury program for 8 to 12 weeks or post-op program before he goes back to like me, his battalion strength coach, because it's so specific and it's so not quite you're fully released, but it's also you're beyond just basic physical therapy, or we're still doing treatment, but you need more than just banded exercises. So we have that as well. We have that here as well. Not all programs have that. I really appreciate that. Basically having an embedded ATC CSCS hybrid on the floor programming and helping with those injured athletes. That's kind of the model here, at least with the high performance model within our physical domain. We also are within a program called Human Performance and Wellness. And as your podcast kind of indicates, it encapsulates not just physical performance, but mental performance, spiritual performance, and even kind of like a social performance. You can even think of more of like health on some of those paradigms. And so with that being said, we have psychologists, marriage, family, life counselors, chaplains, not including like our medical doctors or PAs, and who am I leaving out? Clinical psychologists, organizational psychologists that form the team of this HP&W program. So you're looking at performance and health from a bigger paradigm than just running, lifting, and training. We can get into more of that too as we talk about I think you have a question about the weaknesses, and so I have more to talk about on that. So all that to say that someone's physical capabilities and physical limitations and or performance can be influenced by things outside what's taking place with them physically. Whether that stuff going on at the house, not getting enough sleep, what their nutrition looks like, how they're metabolizing stress or not, hormonally, what's taking place, just multi-layered and multifaceted. And squats, I think, can cure cancer, but it's not the answer to everything.
It probably doesn't hurt to try.
Exactly.
All right, so let's continue down the path here where, in the college setting, you might have like the cross country team. You pretty much know what you're going to get from a cross country competition. Same thing with football. What the quarterback's doing, what the kicker's doing. You kind of get it. How about this military population where they might have a ruck at high altitude in the mountains? They might have to sprint. They might have to pick up a buddy. They might have to do, I think there's always like one or two positions where the guy's kit is like an extra 100 pounds, and they need to be like the stronger version of the stronger version of the super soldier. How do you make these athletes who can do a little bit of everything?
Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of approach that is looking at these athletes as hybrid athletes. It's almost like a decathlete of sorts. And what you just kind of described in terms of the physical requirements these guys might have to endure, might have to display. So I think it becomes down to, where are they going to be operating and what's their training, like where are they going to be operating if they have a deployment? What does that look like? Are they going to be in the jungle of South America? And how does that differ from, if we were still in the Middle East with combat operations, how does that differ from training up for a deployment over there? Very different, terrain, climate, even just like the equipment that they would wear, in terms of like how heavy they would be, the type of equipment they would need to be successful. So it comes down to, I think, similar to what you talked about with a sport, specificity and just, okay, what is required? And then with the leadership on the team, so that would come down to, their team sergeant as well as their captain and their warrant officer. So guys that are basically like the team captains in a sense, if you're thinking of like the sporting model. What do you see as the limitations that your team currently has? And let's address those. So there's been teams here. When I say the word teams, it's generally made up of 12 individuals. It's called an operational detachment alpha is the team. So generally 12 individuals on a team, 3 of those are leadership. And within that team, you have specialists with a specific job. So one's going to be a communications specialist, one's going to be a weapons specialist, one's going to be a medical specialist, one's going to be like a building construction and inventory specialist in a sense. So they're called, Bravos, Charlies, Deltas, and Echoes. Those are the different specialists. They'll have a junior as well. So there'll be like someone who's been on the team for a while that's kind of the expert, and a guy who just got there. So that's 8 people just as their specialty, right? And then you have the 3 people in leadership. And technically there's a 4th people it's called a Fox. He's the intel guy. So that makes up the team. With that team, I think as you alluded to, I would argue that like the Charlie, maybe not even the Charlie, like one of them, like the Echo, has a lot of the communications equipment, so they're going to be pretty heavy. Whereas the medic is also going to have a lot of specialized medical equipment, so they're going to be somewhat heavy. So there will be individuals that will have to carry more things than others. The Charlie would be carrying like batteries and supplies and different things. So within each team, there's going to be different requirements for those individuals. But I also know and have seen that teams kind of take on a certain, characteristic. So you'll see some teams that are more like running or aerobic based teams. They just are gazelles. Like their team sergeant has a very high affinity for running or for just being aerobically fit. And so you'll kind of see that team kind of morph into that. You have other teams where they're very like a mountain team. So a mountain team is a team that needs to be able to operate in a mountain. So they need to have some pretty strong legs, pretty resilient bodies. Those teams tend to be bigger individuals and or individuals that have a good hybrid of strength and endurance. And then you might have other teams like a direct action team that have traditionally been like weight room guys. So they're kind of the guys that are bigger and stronger and probably not the fastest and they're not the most aerobic guys. And so you can kind of tell just from the leadership seeing that team and me interact with that team, what a team is already good at. And then depending on where they're going, okay, is that going to serve you well to kind of lean into that more? Or do we need to make the physical profile of your team a little more robust because you're going to be going to an environment that is not your strength? So that's kind of how I think I approach the physical part of like a needs analysis of a team. So it's specific to what does that team's kind of make up? Is it everything? So then it's kind of hard to make one program that fits for them. Or is it like, no, most of the team is X, so that's why we need Y and Z, or a little more of Y and Z. Because a lot of times when a team is good at X, they're going to do X whether I program it or not. Kind of like that dude in the weight room that just loves to bench. He's going to go to the recreation center and bench. Even if we bench that dude 3 times a week, he's going to go show off in the recreation center in a tank top his bench, just because that's just what he likes to do, right? Same thing here. Like, I don't need to give them more of what they like and what they do because they already do it. Now I can help give better context of how they can do it more optimally, but we're probably going to focus on the things that they're not very good at, or the things that their team knows, their team leadership knows they need to improve to be a better, more well-rounded operator, if that makes sense.
Yep.
You talked about addressing weaknesses. Does that answer your question a little bit? Because I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into like a needs analysis, but
yes, it does. At some point, I want to hear your thoughts on like when does the group when does the gazelle group that's good at running, when are they running too much and they're losing strength? I want to hear a little bit more on interference at some point. So approach it as you will.
So when you're talking about interference, you're talking about like just describe the interference effect that you're talking, or that you're
like I am running so often and doing so much, maybe swimming or biking, that I'm losing muscle mass. I'm losing strength.
Yeah. So I think that becomes pretty individual. I think that becomes more individual than the team, although the team can, people on the team as well as the leadership can recognize when that's taking place. And so there's one team in particular I can think of right now who is like a brand new team. There's only like 6 guys on that team out of 12. They're still trying to fill that team with more individuals. And that team is more filled with people who just need to be consistent with their training and need, more than anything, aerobic capacity. Like, they might be a little overweight, or some of the guys might be, and they might not. The guys that are on that team aren't your gazelles, aren't your aerobic monsters. So that team leadership sees the value of, hey, no, the team sergeant's like, I run a lot, I am good, but I know my team doesn't. My team needs more of that, and I need more strength. So how can we combine a program that gives them what they need, but then also make sure that the people that are already aerobically fit get strength? And so it's creating a hybrid program that can address each of those needs. And then if people need to lean in more to the aerobic side, then they just, let's say it's a 5-day program, then they are insured to do all the programming that I have that relates to their aerobic capacity. Whereas the other guys that are more aerobically inclined, they just need to not leave any of that strength work left unturned. Like, they have to hit that. I think it's Alex Vaeda has a book. He's a coach. I think he's a CrossFit coach, but he's out of I think North Carolina. He has a book called The Hybrid Athlete. And some of the program that I've written for my guys here has been based off of his model. So I haven't just copied his programming and just put it, like, rewritten it. It's more of like, hey, how does that programming apply? So he has these programs that are like, an Olympic lifter and a 5K, or a power lifter and a marathon. Like, how do you create programming so that this hybrid athlete can make progress and not lean or have this interference effect of leaning one way too much? And some of my best programs that guys have seen progress with are programs that are designed like that weekly they're designed in such a way that you're getting the rest and you're getting the recovery necessary from one training stimulus, like a long run, that won't necessarily affect your heavy strength work, which then won't affect some of your speed, like track work. And you can do that in the weekly battle rhythm or op tempo in a way where you can have minimizing interference effect. And then over a course of a program, you can not only see aerobic capacity and or speed increase, you can also see sometimes strength either maintain or gain, depending on if a guy's already strong or if he's just trying to like maintain his strength but increase his aerobic capacity by X-fold. And I like the hybrid athlete both mantra as well as a model of me trying to program, because these guys, although personally like to go down like rabbit holes of becoming, an ultra marathon or a marathoner, or they like being a CrossFit guy, or they like being a power lifter and lifting as much weight as they can. Their job does not require them to do any of those things by themselves. And it's cool. It's a value that they have, and it's a passion they want to pursue. But your job and how you're supposed to train for your job is to be this hybrid athlete, and that you can go ruck in the mountains and endure, a 6K movement with an 80-pound pack, be able to drop that and then engage, an enemy fighter and sprint and move and be agile. And then if need be, exfil that same area with your same ruck in a pretty expeditious manner, and still be able to recover to be able to do something very similar the next day or the next few days, which requires a level of strength and a level of endurance and a level of agility and a level of mobility that, I guess the best way to kind of compare that to an athlete in sports would be like a decathlete, or someone who has all those physical attributes. I think that might answer your question. I think that that's the challenge, and that's kind of like the challenge being in tactical. It's because you don't just have like one sport that you can really dive deep into and really kind of give them the opposite of what they're getting every day, especially like a cross country runner. You don't need to give them aerobic endurance. You don't need to give them, sets of 20, sets of 25 or whatever, in terms of like muscular endurance. They probably need something very opposite of that.
Yeah.
Whereas with this population, it's individually it's going to be nuanced, and then by team it's also going to be nuanced. But I think the guys that and the teams that understand the level of like how robust they need to be in terms of like what they need to do physically, and it's not just 2 or 3 things, but it's multiple things. I think those guys understand better like how I can help them perform, and ideally not just perform but have sustained performance, and then also hopefully by way of how we're training, how that training can help with their longevity. As we know, whether you're just under the bar lifting really heavy, or if you're just running all the time, how injuries and overuse injuries can sneak up and can nickel and dime you until you're no longer able to train at all. Versus if you had more variety in your training, you wouldn't have as much, I think, of those overuse injuries, and you'd have a more robust musculoskeletal system to be able to sustain the stresses that the job requires for them. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So you're working with men who are pretty elite. They're kind of at the peak of what they can be doing in the space that they're doing it. But when you go home, you're working with men who are at the beginning of their lives. You've got 4 sons at home, and then I have some little ones at home, and some people listening may already be parents or future parents. How about some advice on parenting, whether it is for creating good people or creating healthy people? What are you doing that you feel like maybe other people are forgetting to do with their kiddos?
Yeah, I think I even put down on my notes that I'm not sure if I'm able to be a good commenter on this. And I think your question was like the boys reaching their potential. So, man, my oldest is only 8, so I'm not sure if I have the resume to be able to say that just yet. But I think something that I did put down that goes back a little bit to this tactical setting, and you can even see it within the collegiate setting with sports, is you even said it, autonomy. So giving athletes autonomy to make decisions and to have control of their own training, or have control of their own like decisions as it relates to what they want to do. So like some agency as well. When something is forced, like a voluntold type thing, like we've seen in the in the college setting, like voluntold workouts or mandatory voluntary workouts. I think likewise with our kids, if it's by compulsion because you're forcing them to do it, or if it's a voluntold and you take away autonomy and agency, or at least you don't allow for it even at a young age, I think that's where parents might mean well, but I think the kids' resistance to that and or the frustrations of a parent trying to force things that the kids don't want or that they don't see the value in can be frustrating. So an example for that for me is I really like the boys to be in sports. We've talked about that before with our kids, and just like what sports would be fun for them to be involved with from an early age, from a developmental standpoint, like a physical developmental standpoint. So, like your swimming, your gymnastics, your combat sports. So just some basic things that would be fun for kids to engage with and to be involved with, both socially and physically. What I failed to realize until I became a parent was, one, how much my parents sacrificed their time in the evenings to run us around and do all these different extracurricular activities that they had no, speaking of compulsion, they did not have to do, but they chose to, whether it's because of cultural or because they truly valued that for us and wanted us to have those experiences. I want to appreciate that looking back at that now as a parent, because like I said, you only have so much time in the afternoon and in the evenings with your family. And when you sign up one kid for any type of extra activity, it could be sports or it could be ballet or it could be piano, it could be anything. You're signing up the whole family because there's a logistics of travel to and from, and what's dinner going to look like. Are we going to eat together? It's going to be later, and then how's that pushing to bedtime? So we've been more, I guess, conservative in protecting that time in the afternoons to where we haven't formally signed up the boys for anything like that. I think the time is coming where that's something that they truly want, and if they continue to ask for it and they still show interest in it, I think it'll be a time where we can try and meet them where they are without overdoing it. But I think it can be very easy. The more kids you have, and even if they just each have one activity, I mean, like you said, I have 4 and you have 2. That could be several nights a week in multiple different places you're traveling.
Yeah.
But I think this comes back down to some of the stuff that I've been reading over the last few years with having kids on structured play and unstructured play. I think some stuff you probably are familiar with and you've read yourself on the value of kids make belief and just being creative and giving them, kind of like what we talked about before as an adult, like the white space to be able to go deep into focus. And so really just giving kids, especially if kids are already in like a formalized school setting where it's kind of structured for however many hours a day, and then they have this time in the afternoon and evenings, it could be unstructured, but yet then we think that or believe that or want structured activities to like help them, and they think they might seem like they want to do it, is that we're not providing white space for them to be able to use their brains and to use their bodies in a way that's fun and engaging and creates agency because they're making things up, and they also have autonomy of like inviting friends over and playing and doing these different things that in the moment and in the year or 2 or 3 that you're able to do that before they get structured stuff, you might not see or understand how that's valuable because there's no direct result of like them learning a skill and it getting better, or their team playing and this individual and or the team like winning and scoring goals, all these things. So there's no like scoreboard, if you will. But I think with some of the research, what we're looking at with the structured play and the structure of like scheduling of kids and the over scheduling of kids and their time, and that white space is crucial for their mental health and their mental development, as well as their social health and their social development, of having time alone and or having time with others where they're just playing to play.
So
something that I don't know if we're overlooking or that parents are doing wrong, but I feel like here it's also, I think here with this setting too, it's kind of hard because the military, at least a lot of our guys, like they're very driven, they're very structured. They grew up playing sports, kind of like Lindsay and I did. And so I have a lot of people that have kids my same age that are doing all these activities. And so it's enticing to be like, oh man, am I doing my kids a disservice because they're not doing X, Y, and Z? Or like, oh man, like I'm failing John, my oldest, because he probably would have loved to have been in soccer for the last 3 years, but he hasn't. But it doesn't mean that we're not playing soccer and having fun and working on skills at the house. It's just not as formal, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
there's a real tension, I think, as parents to try to find like where is that balance of structured organization, scheduled, and then unstructured, unscheduled, just free play, if you will. I think Jonathan Haidt has a lot to say about this. He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind as well as the Babel Substack. I think he has some other colleagues and people that he works with on just looking at free play and unstructured activities for the health and development of the youth, for creativity and among other things. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I'm not an expert on, but I'm trying to balance myself as a parent.
Yeah, I know. I did some like youth counseling in a play therapy facility, and that was one of the biggest things that we encountered, is that kids have so little time to feel their feelings and like think their thoughts, because you're in dance, and then you're in gymnastics, and then you're watching a movie, and you're being entertained by like whoever the hot shot on YouTube is. That they'll never, like, if they have a bad day at school and somebody's mean to them, or if they're mean to somebody else, they won't like have downtime to like
Process it,
resonate and process that. And so their capacity or their ability to perform introspection is actually diminished. And so like the way that I explain that is I say like those kids, they're losing the ability to feel their feelings. And my wife is a kindergarten teacher, and she had a story like 5 years into kindergarten teaching, is that she said like every Thanksgiving we do the thing where we trace the hand and we cut it out, we turn it into a turkey. And she said when I started 5 years ago, the kids would trace, they would cut it out. I would help them, we would do a sentence on it, and I would write, the big words, and they'd fill in the smaller words. She said in 5 years, the kids got worse at tracing, cutting out, and writing. But they got way better when they pull out the iPads. They got better at zipping through that and like organizing, the technology. So
yeah,
I think that's like there's probably a really strong correlate, or like I think it's a really like it's a physical reflection of what's going on inside of them, is that just like they're ruining Thanksgiving with too much technology, is that I think they're probably just like losing that capacity to like just do like a self check-in or like process their thoughts and feelings. So that's something that I'm concerned about as well. We're trying to, we've got lots of fun stuff to do, but we're trying to keep that downtime too. It's hard to know how much is enough.
I think we're kind of coming back to that theme a few times now, because we talked about deep work and the habit of creating white space as adults. And so I think it's the very same things you just said about those kids are probably true for us as well, in terms of understanding our feelings, feeling our feelings, engaging with uncomfortable feelings, and not having those feelings send us into a depressive state. Just because we're feeling down doesn't mean that the whole world's going to end. And then I think it's okay to, it seems like we're maybe because of Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and just all the things you see online are just like the positive moments. Like maybe it's just this proliferation of us thinking that any negative feeling is not good to have. So I should avoid that at all costs. And if I have it, I need to make sure that I don't stay in it, or I don't understand why it's there, where I feel like that's exactly where we need to pivot to, just so that you can just understand your mind better. You can understand the why that's taking place. Like, why am I feeling anxious? Why am I feeling jealous about this? Well, whatever this thing I'm looking at, or why am I feeling down for no reason? Apparently, that white space, both like we're talking about for our kids, the downtime, the unstructured play, as well as for ourselves, just it's still there. It's just we're choosing not to have it, whether we, I guess, are desiring to or not. So talking about habits, just these phones and these apps and these things, and technology is not the devil, so I'm not anti-technology, but they're just designed in such a way to be habit forming, obviously.
Yeah, they have cracked the code on human psychology.
No doubt.
They know what they know what they're doing for the attention economy is it's paying off. It's paying off pretty well.
Yeah, so I think something that I've listened to or I saw recently about like what's our most valuable asset. It used to, people might have said before, like money, and be able to use money to make things happen and to create the life you want. And I think more recently people like time, because you only have a certain amount of time. So what are you doing with your time? And then I've heard it even pivoted more recently to it's attention. It's not your time, it's your attention, because we're, like you said, we're just giving it away so often and so freely into frivolous things. And then I've seen that more recently in the last year or two, but even more recently, I think within the last week, I saw a different take on it. And it's not, time, money, or attention, it's perspective. We're losing our ability to have perspective because we're not taking both the time and attention to, I guess, to be intentional, or just to be aware even of many things. So it's really interesting arguments on the value of, well, I guess our most significant asset that we could possess, but we don't.
Interesting. Yeah. I know I've been playing around with that social media a little bit more this year, and it's interesting to like have to create new boundaries for new habits and new toys that
Yeah.
I didn't have a smartphone until I was like 20. I was like the last dude to get one. So I held off. I think I outlasted you by a year or two.
Yeah.
But so I didn't have one. I didn't have one of those till I was 27, and I didn't really start utilizing Instagram or really being like aware, not aware of it, but yeah, like even get on there to like age 35, and these are still things that I have to like check myself and be like, okay, when I'm at home, my phone goes here, and like I don't want to have that in my hand when I have an opportunity to like wrestle with my kids instead, and like but they definitely the creators of that they know how to hack into your psychology really well. They know how to get your attention.
Yeah, that's really true.
It's the end of the year. You got any goal setting lined up for next year? Any resolutions? Do you work with any goal setting within your within the guys that you're working with? Any comments on that?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. One, because I didn't prepare for it, Mitch. You didn't have that on your questions. You said no. Two, there should be an article that's coming out later today that I wrote for another colleague of mine that I used to work for, and it's actually on this very topic of goals. And the article, I forget what we landed on the title, but it's like values versus goals in soft performance. And essentially my argument there is kind of counterintuitive to what I've done in the past with goals and being very formal with goal setting. As you know, you've helped me with goal setting structures and paradigms within the teams that we've worked with before. I don't know if you remember the hard goal paradigm that we used, the Mo Beta tagline that we had.
Yeah, the little postcard.
Yeah, so that actually comes up in this blog post that I wrote for my buddy. but my argument is essentially that goals are sometimes goals are necessary, and sometimes they're very productive in helping give someone like a clear path to, okay, this is something that I want. How can I go get it? But my argument is that values and what we value as it relates to physical performance, and the values we center our our habits around, as well as our intention around, have much more impact than like these carrots that we're chasing. And then if we have these values of like how we want to be, how we want to show up, and who we want to be, that we can come back and rest on that more than like knowing we've accomplished all these things in the past. Similar to how I talked about, like some of our guys seem to rest on their laurels of being, SF qualified, and I've accomplished all these things. Well, they are only chasing it to have those as carrots that they can kind of show off or just kind of rest on, versus them being, having the value of, honoring why they signed up to be a soldier in the first place, in terms of it being, hey, you need to be physical. You're going to be required to do some physical things. And so physical capabilities need to be a value in your life. And then how does that play out in, you're not only a soldier, you're a special operations soldier. If you value that you need to be physically capable in any environment, at any time, at any place, anywhere, then you're going to show up and do the work that's necessary to be able to do that, versus like having the next school that you're trying to train for, having the next, even personally, like the next ultra marathon that you're trying to accomplish. Cool. Your values can still show up there, but once you accomplish those things, ideally and hopefully your values and your virtues are still evident, and you don't necessarily need those carrots to be able to chase in order to live those values and to have that virtue. So that should be a good article that comes out. It's going to be, we can link to it here if you want.
Absolutely.
But I think for me, something that I've looked at as kind of like a goal and just as a value too over the last year plus is looking at how I can push myself beyond things that I'm comfortable with. I'm more of like a power athlete. I'm short. I'm built to move heavy weight, like relative to my body weight, not absolute. And so all guys under 200 pounds that weigh 165 pounds, nothing, brag about the relative strength. It's like, it doesn't matter. You can bench 2 times your body weight, but you weigh 140 pounds soaking wet, so who cares? But so we tend to brag about those things. So how could I kind of pivot and challenge myself in an area that I'm not good at nor comfortable in? And so it's been more on the aerobic capacity side as it relates to running. And so I just completed a first marathon earlier this month. And so nice. That was a goal that I had, but it's also like a value that I try to imbibe or like imbue upon myself of like, hey, I am going to become a runner. I'm going to become someone who, 1, likes challenges, 2, is staying active with my mind and body, but 3, can help not only talk to my guys about the importance of some of these things. And one of the most important things I talk about to my guys is about this aerobic capacity. I don't think all of our guys have to be endurance monsters, but I think they all need to have a certain requisite level of like endurance. So how can I just not just tell them, but show them? And how can I try and pivot myself to become that too? So with that in mind, that the marathon was just a check mark to an ultra marathon, which will be taking place in January, which will then lead to a longer ultra marathon in April, hopefully. We'll see if my body holds up. What about yourself, besides the podcasting and
that's really the main one I've been working on. I started thinking about this kind of around the turn of December. I've got a birthday in a few days, so I kind of think about like I think the last handful of years, like every year I'll look at either like an area of focus to like research. After yes, I got a few degrees, and we talked about that earlier. It's like you don't need you don't need people to tell you what to learn to like dive into things and get educated. So that's kind of like been my MO for the last handful of years. Once I was done pursuing degrees, is I'll I'll either pick an area of interest to study for a little while. Maybe it's like personal finance. So like I know 2018, you actually helped me out with some resources there. But I spent a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
time on like Mr. Money Mustache and Choose Fi. So I spent a lot of time on that. And then this year, like this past semester, I took a couple of classes. I took like a podcasting course
Cool.
uh, and like a basically like a social media course or like a branding course. So um, that's how that's how institutionalized I am. Is that I will have other people teach me how to use social media. Um, but and then for this upcoming year, I just have like some good contacts who I don't talk to enough, and I'm just kind of thought like maybe I'll just record those conversations, and there'll be some good value there. So
Cool.
that's the neat thing about like where I'm at is that I have people who have become subject matter experts in different areas, and so I think that's the first big step. And then I've got a handful of days to figure out some other goals, but
Nice.
we're gonna start there. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I know
Yeah.
hopefully the article will encourage you to set those goals and also kind of see that, hey, what are your values both as an individual around physical, performance, but also values in general, and how are you living those values that you have, but also how can you lean into those values next year as well as you're chasing after those carrots.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I will say I don't know if I'll do it myself, but I probably need to go do like one jujitsu class. And just get a little taste of that. But my son's turning 4 in a couple of weeks, and I found a local wrestling group for him. So we're gonna see if we can. There's no pressure.
Yeah.
However, it would be hilarious and awesome if he could get into that. So
For sure.
he and his sister will in friendly and unfriendly ways wrestle. So
For sure.
so they have fun with it, and I think I could see him liking it. So we'll see what happens. But maybe
maybe a small like a tumbling mat if you don't already have one is in order for the playroom for this next year for sure.
Yeah, I could see that happening. And then maybe for me personally, I knock out that first jujitsu class and go get hurt, and then come up with a new goal.
Yeah.
Come up with a new goal after that.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any questions or thoughts that you kind of have to get off your chest?
No, I really liked actually one of your prompts that you had about the winning wellness. I'm not sure if you're going to pivot there or not, about what does it mean to win well and be well. I really like that question, just kind of as the premise of the podcast. I think your question is, or your statements, winning wellness aims to help people win well and be well. What is it you think the number one thing everyone needs to focus on to be well, or a common thing that is just not done enough? I even wrote it down. I was like, that's a fantastic question. I had two things, like the difference between, and you kind of articulated this already before I knew what you meant, but winning well versus being well, and the difference between those two. It seems to me that the winning well part sounds like integrity and intention. So like to win well, you need to have integrity in order to win well. So I'm thinking like of a game, of like sportsmanship in a sense. And I think I have intention in there as well, is because if you going back to values versus goals, you have the value of living with integrity and you're intentional about how you go about winning, then I think that's what winning well is. Intentional about your actions, your habits, like we've talked about, your how you live your values. I think that all feeds back to your integrity of trying to win well, and I guess show others that winning is fun, doing it the right way is at least can leave people with more equanimity with just how they're doing it and how they're living their life and being an example for others. I think the be well reminds me of Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be. I don't know why that came up, but I put that down. And I think wellness is like a continuum, and it's multifaceted with, physical wellness and mental wellness and, social wellness and how you're doing with the relationships. And I think I had, just with things in what I've looked at over the last year in my own notes that I've taken and saved in different places, and with different things that I've listened to and read. And the thing that comes back to me with wellness over the last year is mental, or like mind, your mind. And I think that's one of the questions you had is like, what is something that everyone needs to focus on to be well? And I think the mind is something, and we've kind of alluded to this a lot today.
Sure.
Maybe not necessarily the mind particularly, but creating white space for our minds to kind of rest in and or be just to have time to think or to deep dive or whatever for us and for our kids. So I looked at all my notes and everything, and that was a word that came up quite a bit, which was interesting, that I hadn't even thought about until I saw your question this morning. Was going through my notes. I think that the thing that I put there was minding our mind would be my number one thing that I've kind of been on this last year, and I want to continue to lean into for this next year. Because that's how we interact with reality. Like, it's through our mind that we're able to have even just this sensory experience. It's through our minds that we can understand and hopefully interpret our feelings, our emotions, like we talked about with our kids, and not having the time and space to do that, as well as how we, experience the world.
Yeah, that's a perspective that you were talking about earlier. We were talking about the attention economy, but you're saying the perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's actually a quote. It wasn't from the person who was arguing for the perspective, but about the mind. And I'll just read the quote. It might take like 20 seconds, but I think it kind of encapsulates how I've been engaged with just thinking about the mind and how we interact with just the world, and how our experience of the world can be so influenced just by the state of our mind, for good or bad, distracted or not. The quote is, consider the range of your experience and the role that your mind plays in determining it. When you're anxious about the future, that is your mind. When you're filled with joy, that is also your mind. When you're loving or kind or generous or amazed at the beauty of nature, this is your mind. And when you're angry or vindictive or filled with shame, that is also your mind. Of all the things worth tending to in this life, what is more important than your mind? That's from an app that I downloaded this last year called Waking Up. Waking Up app by Sam Harris. It's a meditation app, but I think this last year I was trying to be more just intentional about having that white space, and I guess kind of not necessarily jumping on the meditation bandwagon, but just kind of seeing what it is about, because I've never really done that before, and it's been good. I wasn't as consistent, I think, as I wanted to be throughout the year, but I definitely engaged more in that practice and taking moments of reflection that I had probably ever. So it was good, a good kind of spur in that direction. So
do you feel like you are able to mind your mind during runs, or do you have to create like a separate time for that?
I think the opportunity to mind your mind during runs is there, as long as I choose not to distract it with just engaging with more information, whether that's an audiobook, a podcast, or just listening to music. But in times where I decide not to take in any type of medium of technology, I definitely know and feel like I work out all kinds of things, whether it's professional or personal, emotional, in my mind. And there's all kinds of connections I think that take place whenever I'm doing that. And I feel like running, maybe cycling. I've never cycled for any period of time. but especially with running, because it's very easy and it's a medium to which you just throw shoes on and go out and engage with it, versus like lifting or something where you have like equipment or you're a little more involved with the action of it, can lend well. It could even be just walking or ruck walking or walking with a backpack. I feel like those things can lend well to, one, being outside and being in nature, which we know the benefits of that. Two, engaging your body, which then can, you know, create synapses, do all kinds of stuff for your brain and for your mind. And three, like I said, if you don't have, or like for me, if I choose not to bring technology with me, then it's an automatic white space clear, as long as I'm not trying to do like a tempo run or like a threshold run where I'm breathing hard.
Yeah.
Just aerobic, hey, just go out and get some time. I think that's what I've enjoyed the most, or part of what I've enjoyed the most of this last year, and all the time and energy I've spent in, you know, training and running and doing the zone 2 thing is having that time. So I definitely believe that. But once again, like you said, with the things that you're doing this last year and you're going to continue to do with whether social media or just engaging with technology and using it as a tool for productivity, if I don't put boundaries around it, then I could just kind of, not mindlessly, but for whatever reason, just have this desire to just continue to like engage and absorb and try and just intake information and knowledge and bring in more and more and more, versus letting it kind of ruminate and letting it set and just saying, okay, what can I do with that knowledge, versus just desiring to get more, like, okay, how can I act upon what I've already listened to, or how can I make connections with things I already know, and what creative output can I produce. So be more, I think you can have with that white space with running, if you choose not to intake the stuff through technology, it'll be less consumption based and it'll be more production based. You'll be productive in terms of what you're going to get out of that session, but you can also produce writing and or thoughts or reflection, and have time and space for that, versus always consuming, because like you said, our data or our technology driven world is mostly just about consumption.
Yeah, it's I'm glad to hear you're pivoting into the creator space a little bit more with the blog writing, and I know you're a great resource, and I know we've talked a little bit before about how addictive learning can be. So it's kind of tough to pump the brakes when you're doing something that's productive and it's lauded. You know, there's a big positive reinforcement behind that learning, but at some point you just it's good to like empty the tank a little bit, and yeah, it's awesome. All right, well, thank you so much for your time, your expertise. I don't know if you're open for anybody communicating with you. If not, no pressure to share like a contact source or anything like that. But if somebody's listening to this and they want to have follow-up questions, is there a email or anything that they can reach out to?
Yeah, so I think the best way would probably be email, since I'm not on social media. I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, but the email would just be my first name, so Travis dot last name Pelletier, Pelletir @gmail. That'd be the best contact information for questions, comments, concerns, anything else. So I think there's one of the other questions you had on here I thought was really good, is what questions I have not asked that I should. I think that's a great question to end with the podcast, especially as you do this more and more. I think one question that one of our PTs have asked in some interviews over the last couple of years to candidates for any position, which I think is really cool. So it doesn't matter what position, but the question is, what is one of your most proud moments as a ATC or as a strength coach, whoever it is? I think my answer would be twofold. Like, what would be the proudest moment as what is one of my proudest moments as a strength coach. On the collegiate side, I think it's whenever I've had athletes reach out to me after their career and give me updates or invite me to weddings, or basically show that the influence that I've had has gone more than just beyond the walls of the weight room or the playing field. That's really cool. More so than any championships or physical feats that they've accomplished through our influence as coaches or our programming or whatever. I think a tactical setting is very similar, and it's being entrusted so much with an operator that they'll come inside my office and shut the door, and we'll basically have a deep or a hard conversation about something that's not even related to physical training. And so I think to garner those types of moments with those athletes just show that, one, your influence can go beyond what you can even imagine or think. Like there's times where athletes, I'm sure you've had this, will come back to you and say something like, "You said this one time, coach," and you're like, "What? Are you sure that was me? That sounds a lot wiser than anything I ever say." Or you might not even show them anything. You might have something on your wall, or you might have and they come back and they'll say something how it influenced them. Like, "Oh my God, I didn't even realize that." And it's the same thing I think with our kids. There's things that we're saying that we're doing or not saying or not doing that they see that at some point they're going to come back for good or for hopefully sometimes worse, or hopefully not worse. But hey, you did this or you said this, and this is how it affected me. And so I think that's a really cool question. I think it can give, if you are going to use that interview process, it helps give you an idea of what that person values in terms of their role as one of the most productive things that I've had on my phone that's been more of a help than a hindrance, as we're talking about technology and how we can be very distracted by it, is an app called Reader. It's a read later app, but it's by a bigger app called Readwise. And essentially the Reader app is a read later app, meaning that anytime you have any piece of information that comes into your news feed, or someone sends you an article, or just there's an email that comes to you that just is enticing that you want to check out and look at, what I've been able to do with this Reader app is take any of those sources of information that I want to capture and put it into this read later app, and know that at some point I can get to it. I can either read it then and there inside that app, or I can read it later. The cool thing about it is inside that app, it allows you to take notes on an article. You can highlight the article, and then you can also distill it and put your own comments about what you highlighted within that article in this app. And then you can share that with yourself in another place, or you can share it with others with those notes that you highlighted, as well as your commentary on those notes, which is really cool. The other thing that I think has been beneficial about this the Reader app, this Read Later app, is that it also allows you to listen to articles or listen to things that normally you'd have to take the time to read and scroll through. And that's been highly beneficial as I've been running more, as well as on your commute, where you might not want to listen to a podcast, or you're not having just your own time where you're not engaging with anything. You can actually kind of get through some of your some of the things that you've been wanting to read in your email or articles, but you don't literally have to read it. You can listen to it. So it basically turns anything into an audio form, which has been beneficial.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good stuff. And yeah, it's stuff like that. That's why I wanted you to come on here and talk. Not for other people, just for me, because I knew I was gonna get some good stuff out of this personally, despite having known you for so long. But yeah, that's I wrote that down, and I'll definitely be checking that out. All right. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it. Would love to say I'll pay it back sometime, but I know I can't. So
that's all right.
Thank you so much for listening to our Winning Wellness podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for podcast guests or topics, you can submit those through YouTube comments. You can message me on Instagram. My handle is Mitch Schwartzman, or you can email me at coachmitchschwartzman@gmail.com.